Hi everyone, Valerie and I are taking our summer break, so we've raided the vault and picked a few favourites to revisit. This week I've picked Bridget Jones's Diary. Now it's easy to dismiss Bridget Jones' Diary as a simple story that author Helen Fielding simply wrote off in a weekend. But nothing could be further from the truth. Even though it's a lighthearted story, Bridget is still a dimensional character, and that is why we love her. Now, this movie hits all the right notes and delights in being a romance. At some point, as an author, no matter which publishing model you choose, you'll need to be able to explain what your story is about in a way that is short and compelling. To publish traditionally, you'll need a one-sentence pitch and a 300-word plot summary. Indie authors will need a one-sentence pitch and a back cover blurb. Now, it took Valerie 11 years to discover how to boil down an 80,000 plus word manuscript into something that grabs attention. But now you can learn it in less than an hour. She's just released the Hook Formula, which is a works every time method for describing your book in a way that captivates readers and makes them beg for more. But in the meantime, please sit back and enjoy Bridget Jones's Diary. If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor and poet, and I have a passion for spy stories, fairy tales and master detective novels.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Bridget Jones' Diary so that we can study character development. This 2001 film was directed by Sharon Maguire from a screenplay by Richard Curtis, Andrew Davies, and Helen Fielding, and it's based on the novel of the same name by Helen Fielding. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. However, I think we're probably going to be pretty safe with Bridget Jones this week. And we'd really love it if you could give our show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. All right, Valerie. Now, Bridget's a pretty familiar character to me. I was worried that I was turning into Bridget at one stage in my life. So how did you go with character development this week?
Okay, I chose this movie this week because it's a really obvious example of a character's actions revealing who they are. You've heard the saying that action speaks louder than words, right? I'm sure everyone's heard that. Well, that applies to characters in stories as well as the people we meet in real life. What they do reveals who they are. What they say holds little, if any, water, unless, of course, we're talking about subtext and dialogue. That's a whole other topic. That's why, in a love story, for example, having a character say, I love you, falls flat. It's much better for a character to show that they're in love, and this is the proof of love scene. Now, before I get to the movie this week, I just want to say a quick word about the book. Helen Fielding's book, because it's so funny, is often dismissed as being lowbrow or somehow lesser than. Yes, it's quick to read, and therefore people think it must have been quick to write. Not so, not so. Actually, what Helen Fielding has done in the book is quite clever. So if you're writing a diary book or a first-person narrative, put this book on your list of stories to study. Alrighty, let's get back to the movie. Now, it is a rom-com. It's a pretty light movie, so I don't have a huge amount to say this week, but what I do have to say is pretty important. The change in Bridget is subtle, but it is there. And it has to do with her feelings of self-worth. In the beginning of the story, Bridget says that she wants to improve herself. And to her, that means changing her physicality. If she loses weight or drinks less or smokes less, she'll get a husband. She starts a diary to tell the truth, the whole truth about Bridget Jones. And so what she does is just write down a list. It's her stats. This is the truth about Bridget Jones. To her is a bunch of stats. She's 136 pounds. She smoked 42 cigarettes. I don't know if that was in one day. Consumed 50 alcohol units. I hope they were small units. The first resolution, New Year's resolution that she makes is to lose 20 pounds. But she also resolves to, quote, find a nice, sensible boyfriend and not continue to form romantic attachments to any of the following: alcoholics, workaholics, commitment phobes, peeping toms, megalomaniacs, emotional F-wits, or perverts. And then she says she will especially not fantasize about her boss, Daniel Cleaver, who embodies all of those things. All right, that's what she says. But what does she do? Well, immediately we see her out drinking with her friends, drinking to the point of falling out of a cab. She's smoking all the time and she's eating junk food. And we see her wearing a very short miniskirt to work with the express intention of getting Daniel's attention. And of course, the second Daniel pays her any attention at all, she jumps right into a relationship with him. So much for that resolution. Now, when you have this kind of discrepancy in a character, it's what Robert McKee calls a dimension. Dimensions are good. They make characters interesting. Remember last week when we did Can You Ever Forgive Me? We said that Lee Israel was exactly who she appeared to be. Now, the closest thing to a dimension that I can come up with for Lee is that she talks about being a great writer, yet she isn't writing. That's the closest thing, but I still don't think that makes her very interesting because the story isn't really about her writing. It's about her forgery. So a dimension is a conflicting set of traits. And in Bridget's case, she's one way in public and another way in private. And that's what I want to talk about now. Now, what's happening with Bridget is easy to laugh off and dismiss because, yeah, it is funny. But there's a whole lot of storytelling goodness in here. So first, this dimension shows that there's a difference between the private Bridget and the public Bridget, okay? Privately, she believes she needs to change her ways. Publicly, she leans into the very behavior that she says she wants to change. So her list of resolutions is the second time that we see this change that she wants to do and this dimension in her character. The first time is during her mother's turkey curry buffet. So by the time we get to the opening credits, we've already seen examples of this dimension of Bridget's twice. So they're really, the filmmakers and the screenwriters are really playing it up. So at the turkey curry buffet, Bridget is talking to Mark Darcy. And she puts on this act of being a hip urbanite, a woman about town, a party girl, a woman who is super popular with a packed social schedule. And she does it because she thinks that's what she's supposed to be doing to impress others. That's the persona that she is trying to convey to impress Mark Darcy, who's a top barrister. The reality is that she is alone and lonely. We saw this with Lee Israel too, right? Although you couldn't get two more different characters than Bridget Jones and Lee Israel. We see Bridget drinking alone and singing all by myself, like singing it at the top of her lungs. And she's full of self-pity. I mean, this is why she starts the diary. She wants to make sure that by that time the following year, she's not sitting there drunk and alone and feeling sorry for herself. Now, the second thing that this dimension does in terms of storytelling is that it establishes Bridget's maturity level. Now, I don't mean to suggest that she is immature, but this is a maturation story, and many romances and rom-coms are. So there has to be something that Bridget doesn't understand at the beginning, and then over the course of the story, she, learns a lesson, or she has a realization, or she just sees things differently. And that is what happens in Bridget Jones's Diary, and it works extremely well. At the end of the story, when Mark and Daniel are literally fighting over her, she sends them both away. She had been desperate for a man at the beginning. Any man would do, even one that she swore that she would not get involved with. The first one who pays her any attention, she goes after. So she had been desperate for just one man, and now she has two, and she rejects them both because she has come to the realization that what they're offering isn't, quote, good enough for me. I'm not willing to gamble my whole life on someone who isn't quite sure. Now, because there's a discrepancy between what she says and what she does, her resolutions about her weight and so on, they're just totally shot, right? When she gets to the new year, she hasn't lost 20 pounds. In fact, she has gained 4 pounds, and she has consumed too many alcohol units to count. She says there are thousands of them. Now, this idea of a dimension, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around when you first hear about it, but it is worth the work and the effort to figure out what it means. It's worth taking the time to start wrapping your head around it and embracing it, frankly, because this is one of those things that will really make your writing pop. It's a big payoff for getting this right. So remember last season, in the episode that we did on As Good as It Gets, I said that what we want to do is create a fascinating character, not a likable one. Well, dimensions make a character fascinating. And that's a great film to go back and look at if you want to get a better idea as to what all this dimension stuff is about, because Melvin Udall has quite a few of them. Now, of course, dimensions don't have to be presented as obviously as they are here in Bridget Jones's Diary, but I thought this was a good movie just to kind of explain the concept. In Ray, which is the first episode this season, Ray Charles is presented as a man who demands loyalty from everyone around him, yet he himself is disloyal. In the movie, he cheats on his wife twice. In reality, he had 12 children with 10 different women. So that's a dimension, right? So in public, he's one way. In private, he's another way. And if you want to study dimension, especially with regards to being one way in public and another way in private, just hang out on Facebook for a while. Oh, Facebook. Okay. Last week, I talked about a character being revealed through her action under pressure. So let's just look at a few moments when Bridget was under pressure and see how she acts. There are a number of times when Bridget is embarrassed socially, and interestingly, her reaction is exactly the same each time. Not surprisingly, it accords exactly with the dimension that I've been talking about. So, Bridget is able to keep smiling in the moment when she's being embarrassed socially, when everything is going south, and she can act like, everything's cool, everything's good, I got this under control. I'm not bothered. But as soon as that hot seat moment is done, she immediately finds a private place to go off and be by herself, and she berates herself, and she criticizes herself, and she kicks herself. So these are more examples like the turkey curry buffet, right? Because she embarrassed herself in the party in front of Mark, and she manages to get through the party. But then the next thing we see is her back in her apartment in London, and she's getting drunk, and she's crying, and she's feeling awful, and she's singing All by Myself, and she's so upset by it that she starts the diary and vows to change her life. Okay, so here's just a couple of more examples from the movie. There's her speech at work when she's introducing Kafka's motorbike, and it doesn't go well. In that case, when she's finished with the presentation, she stays at the party, but she separates herself from the other guests, and we see her standing by herself, off to herself, with her head in her hands, feeling just awful. And we know that the The talk that's going through her head is, oh, how could you do that? Great, now everybody thinks I'm an idiot, and all that kind of a stuff. Then there's the pole incident at the fire hall. In the moment, she manages to get up and finish the spot by saying, great fire hall and whatnot. But then we cut to her back in her apartment watching this clip over and over and over again, this clip of her falling on top of the camera. And we hear her saying, great, now I'm a laughing stock. And then there's the tarts and Vickers party. Now, when she arrives and sees that she's dressed like a bunny and everyone else is in their sensible, respectable Sunday afternoon clothes, she's able to smile and laugh it off. But she gets away from the people as quickly as she can. She's walking through the bushes and she comes upon her father, who also was not told that the dress had changed and it was no longer a costume party. So her father is dressed like a vicar and he feels like a fool too. So each time, her action under pressure is demonstrating that she's actually not the ultra cool woman of the world that she is pretending to be. Instead, she's an insecure woman who's really hard on herself. As she says to Darcy, I pretty much feel like a fool most of the time. So remember, characters reveal through action under pressure. And each time, what you're revealing is a dimension of the character. In other words, you're trying to reveal some kind of a contradiction in the makeup of your protagonist. Now, in Bridget's case, it's a contradiction between who she presents herself to be in public, the cool urbanite, and who she is in private, which is a pretty insecure woman. All right, Melanie, how did you get on with world building this week?
Oh, no. Well, I'm really enjoying world building and looking at world building this season. And later at the end of my piece, I'm going to share some things that I've noticed. Even though it's only the third episode in this season, I'm going to share some things that I've noticed about world building in the 3 movies we've watched so far. All right, so this week I'm going to look at Bridget Jones's world through Janet Burroway's chapter on fictional setting, and this is in the book Writing Fiction. Now, in particular this week, I'm going to consider Bridget's world with the following quote in mind. Character itself is a product of place and culture, and we need to know in what atmosphere a character operates in order to understand the significance of the actions, and that's on page 102. Now, Bridget's world is primarily in London, England, and most of the time, Bridget operates in 3 main groups of people, but in 4 main settings. Now, the first of these is Bridget's family and also her parents' close friend or close circle of friends. Now, in the opening scenes at Bridget's family's home, it tells us a great deal about her background. So the turkey curry buffet, which I just can't even imagine what turkey curry tastes like. But at the turkey curry buffet, there's gherkins, there's floral outfits, these all support the character of Bridget's mother. So she is pushy, she's out of date, and she's trying to get Bridge married off to someone, anyone, right? But she is also critical of Bridget in a way that only mothers can be. And she takes small jabs about what Bridget wears and her marital status and a few other things along the way. Whereas Bridget's father is set up as the odd piece of furniture in the family home. He's standing out of the main social action, and he is affectionate towards his daughter. And, Bridget and her father are very similar in terms of their characteristics, and they both seem to be outside characters in her mother's party world. Now, Bridget's family home also goes into a state of chaos after her mother leaves her father for jaundiced Julian. Now, the house really does reflect her father's emotional state during the separation, which is very interesting because Bridget, again, is very much like her dad. Now, Bridget's parents have a group of friends that they have socialised with all their adult lives. This group of friends have parties and regular catch ups. And Bridget refers to her parents' friends also by calling the closer ones aunt and uncle, even if they aren't related. So we get a very strong feeling about the world that Bridget has grown up with, right? Now, this extended group of familial friends also link Bridget and Mark together, which is a really interesting thing, and I'll explain why that's a bit significant later on. Now, Bridget also has her friends, which she calls her urban family, and their environment is very different. You know, Jude is Bridget's best friend, and Jude is some sort of emotionally unstable person in a kind of odd relationship, but she's also the head of investment at a bank. So in some ways, she is very similar to Bridget, but slightly different in terms of her work and her social standing. There's also Shazza, who's a journalist. And there's Tom, who's the 80s pop icon who just lives off royalties, basically. Now, they are always on Bridget's side, and they are very accepting of her and her foibles and her quirks. And it's very interesting to note that they are usually found in bars, and they're smoking and they travel, and they always travel in a pack of threes. Like they are always together, apart from one small scene at the beginning when Jude calls Bridget. But they move as a group of three. Now, it's worth noting that these two significant groups in Bridget's life are consistent and full of reoccurring characters that have been in her life for a long time. They also occupy different areas or different spaces in Bridget's story. So Bridget's family are in the country and her friends are in London, and they do not cross paths in the year that the movie covers. Now, Mark Darcy is part of both worlds. He grew up in the same circle as Bridget, and he lives in London, although he moves in slightly different circles before the movie begins, and their paths cross more frequently after the turkey curry buffet event. Sorry, I guess that image of a turkey curry buffet just constantly makes me laugh. Anyway. Now, until Bridget meets Mark, her two worlds are separate, but she behaves the same in both. And when I say that, what I mean is in those private spaces. So, with her family in her home, or particularly her father, and then also with her friends when they're out. She behaves the same and very personal in both of those spaces with her friends and her father. Now, her work environment includes the CAD, Daniel Cleaver, who is introduced in a bit of flashback at the publishing house's Christmas party. Now, I don't think it's any coincidence that we meet him and we see Bridget at the Christmas party, because work Christmas parties are notorious for all sorts of terrible, awkward events and moments that everyone would rather forget. And that includes Bridget with her terrible karaoke rendition of I Can't Live If Living Is Without You. Now, Bridget works in publicity at Pemberley Publishing, and she's surrounded by serious publishing people in a relatively modern office. Now, this publishing house is associated with Salman Rushdie and Jeffrey Archer, so they are credible, and Bridget is very much the odd one out. Bridget's second job at Sit Up Britain appears to be more tabloid than a serious television news program, although it's not another great fit for her, in my opinion, but this job seems to be a little bit more forgiving of her faux pas than the publishing job. Now, apart from Daniel Cleaver, Bridget's work life hardly crosses over into her home life, so there's a very clear distinction between her public and her private worlds in the movie. And that leads to her apartment. Right? So Bridget's home is a small apartment. It's disorganized, shabby but comfortable, and it's really quite a small space. So when she's there alone, she's drinking in her flannelette pajamas, which I think is a perfectly legitimate way to spend an evening at home, especially now that I'm a bit older. Maybe not when I was in my early 30s, but definitely now. That's life goals, I think. But it's the smaller details in her flat throughout the movie that clue us into her inner life and support her character's development. At various times, we see close ups of Bridget's fridge and its contents. We also see her swapping out books on her shelves. And we also see a couple of times her underwear drawer. Now, she also has clothes everywhere, and she can't even put her clean undies in the wash basket. And seriously, I can't tell you, as a mum of 4 kids, how much that scene frustrates me. The constant battle I have with laundry. But that aside, right, the nicest we ever see Bridget's apartment is on the night of her birthday dinner. You know, she set the table ready for her friends to come over because she's cooking for them. But by this stage in the movie, she is starting to get her life together apart from her cooking. And for the remainder of the movie, her flat is more organised, but it's still eclectic, like Bridget herself. So Bridget's flat is very reflective of her emotional state throughout the movie, just like her home is very reflective of her father's emotional state when her mother leaves him. Now, there are other locations in the movie where significant events occur, but it's mainly Bridget's family home and her apartment that appear in the movie the most. These are places of comfort for her, and they evoke feelings of safety and familiarity. And this remains consistent throughout the story and is a contrast to her changing working environment and the different party locations that she goes to, which aren't safe. Now, in Janet Barraway's book, she says that, and I quote, "World is the background and character is foreground. Place makes it easier for things to happen and for characters to act certain ways," unquote. Now, over the past 3 weeks, we've seen how the specific worlds of the protagonists have served the stories and provided the relevant environment for the action. Each of these stories have been set in partially familiar worlds, and what I mean by that, is in the real world, not in a fantasy or a science fiction world. Now, the settings have made it easier for the story events to occur, and so far, the worlds have not caused conflict or difficulty for the characters. It's really interesting, right, to look at time in these 3 movies as well. So the period of time in the 3 movies that we've looked at so far the movies have covered quite a fair bit of time. Now, Ray, the period of time that movie was set was over 30 years. In Lee Israel's story, it was over a 2-year period. And in Bridget Jones, her story occurs over a 12-month period. Now, I'll discuss some theories about how to think about time in stories next week, but I just want to note that it's important to consider the time period covered by your story as well, because it does add to the world building. Now, the seasons as an indicator of time have played no part in the movie Ray. Now, weather played a small part in Can You Ever Forgive Me? And I think it was very symbolic of Lee's emotional state at the beginning and the end of the movie. And in Bridget Jones, the seasons really do indicate the passing of time. So Bridget's diary starts in the new year, so it's winter time, and the story ends at Christmas time. Now, the weather plays a role in what Bridget wears, which is important especially for the Daniel parts of the story. Now, the world of Bridget Jones looks similar enough to the worlds of Lee Israel and Ray Charles, but they are very different and they are very specific to the characters and their stories. So, what I'm finding is fascinating, and it's linking around to how limited the worlds of the protagonists are And I'll just quickly elaborate on that. So, in the last 3 weeks, what I have found is that in all of the story, there are 3 main types of setting that the story takes place in. So, with Ray, it was in his home, it was in a recording studio, and some sort of performance venue. Now, of course, there were scenes that sat a little bit outside of that, but primarily a lot of the scenes had those settings. In Can You Ever Forgive Me, it was Lee's apartment. It was in bookstores or places that bought and sold literary artifacts. And it was also bars. In Bridget Jones, it's 3 again. So it tends to 3 or 4. So there's her work environment, there's her home with her mother and father, there's her home as well, and there's also bars where she meets with her friends. So this is very interesting, right, to think about where it is that most of the action is going to take place in your story, because it will tell part of the story for you. Anyway, I'm going to keep trying and test that theory as we go through the rest of the season and see if it holds for other types of stories as well. All right, Valerie, what are the action steps for this week?
Well, I've just got one. And I think it's an obvious one this week based on what I was talking about. And what I want you to do is really take a good look at your protagonist and identify a dimension for him or her. You may have done this already. You might be way ahead of the game. And this might be a brand new concept to you and you've never even heard of it before. So remember with Bridget Jones, she is one way in public and another way in private. That's a conflicting set of traits. That's a dimension. So what I want you to do is look at your protagonist and see if you can find a dimension. Does she say one thing and do another? Does she act one way in public and another way in private? Yeah, that kind of thing. So really give it some thought. It's a bit of of mental gymnastics when you first approach this topic. I admit that it's a bit hard to wrap your head around, but it is one of those topics that is really worth the time and the effort. I promise you it is. It will make a huge difference to your writing, and it will make your book a lot more interesting to your reader.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss District 9. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to Valerie's Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Valerie_Francis. If you'd like to get my tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit me on Facebook and Instagram under Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about me at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.